Welcome everyone. I'm Mrs. Nedved. If you haven't had me before in class, I do teach high school math. And who you can hopefully see on your computer screen is Chris Nedved. He is my brother-in-law, so my husband's brother. And I'm sure he will introduce himself and tell a little bit about himself as well. But before we get there, a couple just housekeeping things. I had a couple questions come in via the Google link ahead of time, but if you have questions at any time throughout, just feel free to type them into the questions box, and at the end, I'll read them all off to Chris. Or if you have something that's kind of like pertinent and you want to jump in, use the raise your hand feature, and then that way I'll let Chris know that someone has a question at that particular moment. If you don't want to wait for it. And as I mentioned, we will be recording, or we are recording. So if you want a copy of this, definitely email me and I can send you that out. So before we get started with Chris, if you guys would each just take a minute, just introduce you with your name and tell us what grade you're in and why you're interested in learning about what it's like to be a pilot. Just again, to give Chris a little bit of an idea of who we've got here and can kind of structure things that way. So Zachariah, do you want to get started for us? Zachariah, are you there?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yes.
My name is Zachariah, and I'm in 8th grade. And I'm just learning about being a pilot because it interests me.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Zachariah. Matthew says his microphone isn't working. That's fine. Can you just type me your answer, Matt? How about you, Lee?
I want to learn about being a pilot because I really want to join the military and I want to try Air Force or Marines.
Excellent. We come from a strong military family, so I like to hear that. How about you, Leanna?
Hi, I'm Leanna Allen, and I'm in 9th grade.
Anything specific you're interested in about being from a pilot, or just kind of sounded cool?
Well, I mean, it sounds pretty cool, and I sort of want to go to the Air Force Academy eventually, so.
Excellent. Very cool. Well, I'm sure Chris will have some insight on that as well. And how about you, Matthew? I know you have to type. I know Matt is in the 11th grade, and I know that he's also interested in becoming a pilot. We've talked about this fairly regularly. And I know when we had talked last time, sorry, I'm answering for you, Matthew, but when we talked last time, he said he was looking into a specific program that didn't necessarily require a bachelor's degree, but where he could get his pilot's license and then go from there. Matt, you can answer if that's so accurate or not, or type out whatever you want in the questions box and we'll hit that up afterwards. But at this point, we'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Chris.
Cool. Hi guys. My name is Chris Nedved. So as Melissa said, I'm her brother-in-law. I should hopefully be the right person to answer a lot of the questions and the interests that you guys said you had. And just my background, so you know where I'm coming from, where hopefully I do have the answers to some of those questions. So Melissa's husband and my brother and I grew up in a military family, and I always kind of knew from a young age I wanted to be an Air Force pilot, military pilot. So grew up, tried hard in middle school, high school, and then I went to college. I went to a civilian aviation program in college, but I also originally was slated to head to the Air Force Academy, so I can talk to that a little bit too, since college was almost sort of a backup plan for me to going to the academy when some paperwork got messed up there. So, but I went to South Dakota State University, and then so far as my actual job, I commissioned into the Air Force, and I was lucky enough to be able to get a pilot slot. They kind of see who's interested with that and who's got the academic background, and there's some tests and stuff that can go into that we can talk about. But I was able to get a pilot slot for the Air Force. I spent a little bit of time up in North Dakota while I waited for my turn to go to pilot training to come around. And then I went to down to Texas, kind of right on the border. It's called Laughlin Air Force Base. And it takes, I did a year of pilot training there, a full year, just learning how to fly for the military. And then I went, I've actually kind of bounced back and forth between where I'm at now. So I came out to New Jersey here where I'm at, to McGuire Air Force Base. It's kind of in the center of New Jersey, flying the KC-10, which I think you can see on your screen. And we can talk about that a little bit, but it's the Air Force does air-to-air refueling. It has a smaller tanker that can do that and a bigger tanker that can do it. You know, the air refueling tankers, and I fly the bigger one of those. So I did that for 3 or 4 years, and then I actually went back to teach at pilot training in Oklahoma. So I was out there for 3 or 4 years doing that. And then I eventually made my way back here to the East Coast again, to the same spot in New Jersey, where I actually, within the past year, I left active duty after putting in 12 years of being an active duty KC-10 pilot to being a reserve KC-10 pilot. I'm a little different. So a lot of times with Guard or Reserve, you might think like 1 weekend a month, you know, the 2 weeks a year type thing. But there's actually a small core of people who keep the squadron open and running day to day, while everybody else kind of bounces in for their weekend or their, you know, week here, week there. So they're a real small amount of full-time positions. So I'm actually a full-time reservist. It's kind of like a weird, almost blend of active duty and reserve. So that's what I'm out here doing right now. Actually, I still fly the KC-10. I still do a pretty similar job to what I did before. It's just not active duty, and I shouldn't move around anymore, I guess. But yeah, hopefully I can touch on a couple of different avenues that you guys had, whether it was being a pilot just for an airline, you know, on the outside as a civilian, or whether it was being a pilot in the military, whether it was going to the academy or ROTC or any of those options.
And Chris, I did get Matt's response, and I would like to just share that quick.
Yeah.
Matt says that he's Matthew Pickett in the 11th grade. I want to be a pilot, and I'm currently in the Civil Air Patrol Cadet Program, which I think Christopher did as well, with the Highlander Composite Squadron. I'm the first sergeant of the squadron. I've flown 2 planes in the last 2 years. I've also been to the Air Force Academy 2 times, once for the USAF graduation and once for the Colorado Wing encampment in 2018. So just to give you a little bit of structure for where he's coming from. All right, back to you.
Cool. Yeah, actually, so I have a background in Civil Air Patrol myself. Technically, I'm still a member, even though I haven't gone to a meeting in a super long time, being busy with actual the Air Force military stuff or whatever. But no, I actually started at Civil Air Patrol when I was 12, and I kept through it all the way. And like I said, still technically a member, but that was a really good option too, to make sure that it feels right and that you kind of like some of the military stuff. With that, let's see, I'll go through kind of some of these generic questions, and then maybe we can open it up a little bit, but absolutely please stop me or let Mrs. Nedved know if you guys have any questions at all. I'd much rather get them, you know, answered and then have you forget them or something. So, I guess the just general question. So what does my average workday look like? And do you know, are we mostly talking to a crowd who's interested in military pilot stuff, or do we want to know civilian pilot stuff too? Because I can talk both actually, because in being a reservist, most all of our guys who do just a weekend a month are civilian pilots. So I mean, I'm pretty entrenched with that world too. So Melissa, I don't know what direction you want to take it, but I can talk about both.
I think both would be awesome if you can. I know a couple of kids have asked for the recording already who aren't here, who are not looking at the military side, and I think Matthew falls on the right too. Thank you.
So I'll kind of bounce back and forth here between, hey, what does your average workday look like? And I can tell you what an average military workday might look like, and then you know, an average civilian workday might look like. So hopefully it's not too confusing, but I'll try and answer kind of both sides as we weave through questions here, going through. So an average workday for me, just because you're a military pilot doesn't mean that you fly every single day. I normally fly maybe 1 day a week, and then maybe I'm on a trip, maybe 1 week a month. So for me, the rest of the week, what you're doing, there's still a lot of jobs in the unit that have to get done in the squadron. So some people are going to focus on training. You know, hey, we have to get a certain amount of requirements. You know, whether it's every month or every 6 months, you have to get a certain number of takeoffs, a certain number of landings. For me in the KC-10, I have to get a certain number of air-to-air refuelings to make sure that I'm still current and proficient. and what I'm doing. So an average workday, maybe you're doing training stuff and keeping track of that for other people. Maybe you're doing scheduling and you're actually moving around, names on a board and putting people on this flight and that flight and the other. Maybe we have check rides about every year and a half in the military. That's a yearly check to make sure you can still do your job and you're still proficient and know what you're doing with that. So I'm an instructor, so an instructor pilot. So once every year and a half, they make sure that I'm still giving good instruction and I'm still teaching people the right things or whatever. So I would be doing that kind of 8 to 5, 8 to 4 Monday through Friday. And then 1 day a week, I get to come in and fly. So like yesterday, I was supposed to fly before we ended up having an issue with the airplane, but I'd show up at a little earlier, maybe 6 or 7 in the morning. We would do some last minute mission planning and briefing. We were supposed to take off as a formation of 2 or 3 planes. And so we would talk with the other guys who we were going to take off with. About what our plan was that day, what altitudes we were going to use, what airspeeds we were going to fly, and what activities we were going to be doing. We head out to the airplane and maybe spend an hour kind of doing a pre-flight and making sure that the airplane's still in good working order, and then go take off and fly. So like yesterday, we were supposed to go refuel the Blue Angels. If you know the Navy's air show guys. We were going to refuel those guys and then come back and refuel some F-15s. So another Air Force fighter just kind of off the coast, the East Coast, meet up with them for a little bit and then actually come back to our home base and do some touch and go, some practice coming and landing and then taking them right back off and kind of buzzing around the pattern and doing that a little bit. So, and then maybe 1 week a month as a military pilot, you're on a trip. I went, this most recent one, we went from New Jersey to California and refueled some bombers along the way, and then we stayed the night in California, and then we went from California to Hawaii, and that was just a straight shot out that way, and we had a couple of days off there, which was nice to relax, enjoy the beach, get some good food, enjoy the nightlife a little bit, and then we went from Hawaii all the way back to New Jersey over the course of a little less than a week. But you could go to Europe, you could go to the Middle East, you all sorts of things. Obviously in the military, you might deploy every once in a while too. And then your average workday is a whole lot different. But stateside, at least that's what it's like. For a civilian pilot, airline pilot, I guess, is kind of the pinnacle where people are trying to get to, maybe not a small flight instructor, a regional pilot, but an airline pilot is really only flying or not flying. They don't make them do ground jobs like keeping track of people's training or scheduling because they have other people to take care of that. So a civilian pilot might be gone for like 3 or 4 day stints, kind of doing trips, short little hops. Hey, I went from Baltimore to Florida, Florida to Texas, stayed the night in Texas. And the next day I did the reverse. And then the next day I went from Baltimore to Colorado and stayed the night in Colorado, and then the next day I did Colorado, Ohio, and then back to Baltimore or whatever. So they kind of do short trips, kind of maybe 3 or 4 days gone, 3 or 4 days home, 3 or 4 days gone, a week home. So that varies a little more, but they really only focus on flying, and then their downtime when they land is theirs. They get to enjoy the city, or maybe they've got a lot of guys actually finish degrees, guys and girls finish degrees, and they'll be doing like a online, like a master's degree or something, kind of from their hotel room, taking care of that. So military pilot, you could be doing all kinds of stuff, and then civilian pilot, a lot more focused on flying for your average workday. But it kind of feeds into maybe when the next things you might have in your mind, how many hours a week do you work? So as a military pilot, if I fly 1 day a week, that day might be a little longer. Maybe I come in at 6 in the morning and leave at 6 at night, but the rest of the days are just kind of a normal 8 to 4, 8 to 5. They're pretty flexible. If you had something you needed to take care of, you can take care of it. The hours, so I guess hours a week, 40 hours ish. That's different if you get deployed. So I fly the airplane you can see on your screen, the KC-10, refuels fighters and bombers. So if we're involved over in the Middle East or whatnot, if you deploy, then obviously you're in a nice, fun, sandy location And you might have one day where you don't have to fly, and you can wander around. Maybe they have pools, they have card games, they have video games, whatever you feel like doing. Wander around for a day, do your laundry, just relax, and then the next day you fly. And for us, at least, it was kind of a one-to-one day off, day fly, day off, a couple days flying, where we would fly out of a country and into overhead Iraq and Afghanistan, and then come back and land and maybe have a day off again or whatnot. Like I said, civilian pilot, they do it in short little chunks of home gone, home gone, home gone. But they might be gone 14, 16 days a month, and home for, about the same, obviously, plus or minus a few, for how often they're gone. So there is, if you want to be a civilian pilot and you want to be an airline pilot, with a few exceptions, you would want to make sure that you're okay, kind of living life on the road a little bit, and make sure that your family's okay, with you maybe not coming home every night, which can be a little weird. It's just one of those things that you need to make sure that you and your husband or wife and your kids are okay with, that kind of lifestyle. So just something to think about. As far as schooling, so that can kind of touch on some of what you guys had a question on earlier. So there are different ways to get to be a military pilot. There's kind of three venues. First, you want to be an officer. So to be an officer, obviously you need a high school degree, you're going to need a college degree. And it doesn't necessarily matter if it's online or in person or at the Air Force Academy. It's just you need a college degree. So you could go take care of college on your own, not have anything to do with the military, and then you go through, it's called OTS, Officer Training School. Or you could go to a college that offers ROTC, which is what I did at South Dakota State. I did 4 years for them. I got a pilot training slot, and then the Air Force said, hey, we're going to make you a pilot, and then we're going to ask you to be a pilot for us for 10 years before you're able to leave, because we're putting a lot of time and training into you. And it's kind of the same thing at the Air Force Academy if you were to go and do that, but obviously that's Air Force 24/7 at the Air Force Academy. A lot of civilian, so then to become a pilot after that, after you finish college, or if you had to go to OTS, you would have to go do that. It's about, I think it's 6 weeks now, I can't remember for those guys, of kind of like basic training. And along the way, if you wanted to be a pilot, you would do certain tests. So they do like coordination, it's kind of hand-eye, weird video game type stuff to make sure that you have the coordination that it might take to be a pilot. There's some written tests that kind of focus on math and reading charts and science and spatial intelligence, obviously. Almost kind of some being able to picture things visually and how things line up, and you'd be able to read and interpret information pretty quick, because that's important to the job. And then at a certain point, they combine that, your hand-eye coordination scores with your test scores, with your grades, and they come up with a number and a ranking, a rack and stack of who they, if you can make the cut to even potentially become a pilot. And then they look at that list and say, okay, we're going to grab this many people and try and send them to pilot training. So I spent a year down at pilot training down in Texas, which I mentioned earlier. If I click through here on some of the photos, you'll spend the first 6 months flying that aircraft you see there. They start everybody off with about a month of academics, just talking about flying, talking about instruments and weather, talking about aircraft systems and what to do if something goes wrong in your particular airplane, talking about flying and rules and regulations, talking about physiology and what you can expect from your body when you go fly, especially in that aircraft when you go do aerobatics and whatnot. So you spend about a month doing the academic portion, and then you move on to actually flying that aircraft for about 4 or 5 months. You learn how to land, you learn how to fly in bad weather, you learn how to fly formation, like what they're doing right there. And then you'll go on after that. I flew the aircraft you'll see on your screen now. It's called a T1, which is kind of like a small business jet, because you'll split kind of halfway through pilot training. Hey, if you're going to fly refueling aircraft or cargo aircraft, you fly the T1 there. And then if you're going to fly fighter or bomber aircraft, then they'll put you in a smaller, almost looks like a miniature fighter called a T-38, which you can look up if you're interested. I don't have a photo on the slideshow actually, but So you spend another 6 months in that, and then that's your year, and then you go back to, for me, the KC-10 right there. And actually, we can click through over to the KC-10, which you see there. So for a civilian pilot, you kind of have to work your way up, because airlines will normally want to see about 1,500 flight hours, and they want a certain proportion of that to be turbine time. So not just propeller time, they want actual jet engine aircraft for you to be flying. So they're going to want an hours requirement. A lot of them require a college degree. And an easy way to kind of check all those boxes and get your way there is to go in the military. And even if you don't want to finish out a full military career, to give the Air Force 10 years or whatever they want, and then slide over to an airline as you might want. So if you were to work your way up entirely civilian, you would probably start off going to a flight school, getting your private pilot's license, your instrument rating, your commercial rating. Eventually, you might decide to do some instructing, so that you're getting paid a little bit of money to go earn flight hours teaching somebody else, again, in smaller aircraft, and then you kind of work your way up. So maybe once you have enough hours instructing in smaller aircraft, you can go to a regional. So if you've ever had to be on one of the smaller aircraft that maybe hold like 40 passengers, maybe 50, 60 passengers, somewhere in there, the smaller ones, maybe you go and fly one of those planes for 2, 3, 4 years and build up enough jet engine time as to where then eventually you can go to a legacy carrier, if, for instance, something like American or Delta or United, and then you're able to put in time with those guys and start to build time as a civilian airline pilot. We kind of talked about school costs to become a pilot. So if you want to be a military pilot, I did ROTC, so I was fortunate in that the Air Force said, hey, we'll pay for your school as long as you come work for us for 10 years afterwards. So there's a commitment with that. I mean, it's tough if you decide after just a couple of years, like, I don't know if I really like this, maybe I wanted to do something else. You still owe them, and I don't know too many people who ended up feeling that way at all, because everybody who I went through with really loved aviation, but it is a commitment. So they're doing something for you. They want you to do something for them. If you're to go through a civilian aviation school, they can be super expensive. If you look at like Embry-Riddle would be kind of the one that comes to mind for most people. You're going to pay a lot of money to get those flight hours, because flying's a hobby or profession that if you pay to do it, it's pretty expensive. So I'd let you look up the numbers from Embry-Riddle or another aeronautical university and see how much that is, but I'll just say not cheap. The school cost if you go to the Air Force Academy would be free. I mean, they pay to put you through school. If you go through OTS and then you apply to the Air Force, there can be some tuition payment type plans where they'll pay for your school loans and whatnot. But again, on the civilian side, you would be putting yourself through college. You'd be paying a lot of money for flight hours along the way, kind of with the hope later off that you get the job you were hoping for, and you would pay that back and go that route. So average starting salary for a pilot in the military, it's all publicly available. I'm trying to think. I probably started off at about $70,000, maybe $80,000. As you work your way up in rank, so you'll be a second lieutenant, a first lieutenant, a captain, a major, a lieutenant colonel. I'm a major right now. I've been in for about 12 years. On the military side, that equates to being about $130,000, $140,000. There are other benefits that come with that. I have a post 9/11 GI Bill, which since I already had put myself through college, I'm able to put that toward my son. My son has his 4-year college degree paid for with a living stipend and everything that the Air Force provides, because I worked for the Air Force a certain amount of time. The healthcare is a huge thing. It's kind of one of those things that stinks and you don't like to think about, and it's a very adult thing that is probably nowhere near your mind, but the military takes care of your healthcare, which is nice in case you were to ever get sick or you ever have a family member get sick. Stuff can get really, really expensive. So average starting salary for a civilian pilot, you kind of start off not great. Like if you're an instructor pilot, you might only be making $30,000 or $40,000 in a small aircraft. If you're lucky, if you go to a regional airline, you might only be making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. When you finally get to a legacy carrier, if that was your goal, somebody like American, Delta, or United, the first year pay might only be $80,000, $90,000. the second year pay, you start to make a lot. A lot. Second year guys can be making 140, 150,000. And your goal is to just get seniority and to stay with the airline long enough that pay keeps clicking up really fast. There are guys who, after they've been with an airline for 15, 20 years, are making $250,000 or $300,000 a year. It can be an extremely lucrative career. So the pay would be good. Maybe most applicable to you guys and girls with where you're at now, you know, what can you do in a high school student? What kind of classes would you want? What kind of extracurriculars would you want? What kind of, what should you think about in college? So, and my biggest recommendation is just, you need to do as well as you can and to kind of broaden yourself a little bit. So, so two different sides or whatever. The military does not require a specific college degree. So even though I had an aviation degree, they don't require an aviation degree. I had friends who went through with a zoology degree. I had other friends who went through with a management degree or a business degree or an engineering degree. Some of those help more than others. So they don't specifically care about college degree, but your grades have to be good. And it's the same thing in high school or middle school with where you're at now. You really, really want to have good grades. And they don't necessarily need you taking, you know, some super hard classes. They'll help prepare you later on for college and everything. But if I were to give recommendations, yeah, maybe a little extra focus on math, a little extra focus on science, and then do something physically, do something extracurricularly. So I would try and get one sport-ish type of thing. Maybe you play JV basketball, maybe you do soccer, but do something physically, because you do want to be in good shape. Obviously the military is going to require it, and it's a good healthy option anyway, right? So and then something kind of extracurricular. So maybe you volunteer. We had one person who said that with a Civil Air Patrol, which I did, and that was great. Maybe you volunteer with the Red Cross, maybe you volunteer at a food bank or a homeless shelter, but you want to do something that bigger than yourself to show that kind of volunteerism and you're thinking of others too. So but classes in college, again, it doesn't necessarily matter what degree, but just make sure you get good grades. And again, still keep doing something physical. You don't have to be a collegiate level athlete, but something, and something volunteer, and then eventually you'll get yourself there. Extracurriculars, Civil Air Patrol is a great one, but that's kind of me being selfish and talking about something that I did back in the day. JROTC would be good. ROTC would be good. I volunteered for the Red Cross when I was younger. That's good. Just something, some sort of volunteer, something bigger than yourself. And some of the JROTC or the Civil Air Patrol type things can be good to figure out if you really like military life, or if that's for you, or if maybe it's not your favorite thing. You can realize that earlier and kind of steer yourself a different direction if you decide it's not right for you. So, I tell you what, we got a couple of questions that people had sent in, so I'll answer those quick, and then we can move on to whatever questions you guys had for Mrs. Nedved. And I can make sure I answer any questions you guys had, if that works, Melissa. Let's see here. Somebody asked what subjects do you need to study in high school and what's the average pay? So hopefully we answered those. But if you still have questions, let me know and we can go back and touch on that. Somebody asked what it's like being a pilot in the Air Force. Yeah, I mean, I touched on kind of the specifics of it, but overall, yeah, it was good. Like I really enjoyed a lot of the things I did. I felt the most useful in my life. You saw that the photo on your screen right there is kind of when we were doing air-to-air refueling. If I cycle through here, that's kind of our cockpit or whatever. But if I cycle through here, so the photo on your screen now is me in the back of the aircraft, and then on the right side of the screen is us refueling a B-1 when Gaddafi got a little antsy back in, would have been 2014 or 2014, I believe, in Libya, and started trying to hurt his neighbors and other people in the region. We were able to go in and help square him up and get him back to where he needed to be. And we were part of the package that destroyed his Air Force overnight. And that's when you really feel, when I felt the most useful in life, when what I was doing actually when we landed was on CNN, people saying the things we had done and the things that we had helped achieve. You know, obviously as a tanker, I wasn't dropping bombs. We helped the people we were, and that's kind of the big theme in the Air Force is even if you're not the person, a fighter pilot or a bomber pilot, like everybody is helping to do something that's valuable and worthwhile. Whether you're in the Air Force and you're a finance officer helping people get paid, whether you're in the Air Force and you're a maintenance officer who's helping keep the airplanes repaired, whether there's any kind of number of jobs, but everybody in the military is doing something toward a larger goal. And when you feel like a part of that larger goal and when you achieve something, that's when I felt the most useful in life. On the same token, like the Air Force had some negative things that kind of got me away from being active duty to the full-time reserve job I'm in now. You don't get to choose when or where you move. You're normally in a place for 2, 3, 4 years, and then you get to move again, which can be good. If you didn't like where you were at, then great, you get to move. But if you liked where you're at, then that kind of stinks. I deployed a lot actually. So with the military, the first year I was in the military, I was gone probably 8, 9 months of that year. Back in 2008, 2009, just because of how busy we were in the Middle East. So if you don't like spending time in the desert and living in kind of a small dorm, and it can get old after a little bit. Obviously, we were doing good things. I think everybody still enjoys time at home and whatnot. So there are pros and cons. The pay is good, the healthcare is good, but if you're a military pay, kind of clicks up steady. Civilian pay, you would start off below that, but then at a certain point, you're going to start making a lot more than your military buddies. So I mean, and on the civilian side, you could be doing all kinds of good things. So the same thing with being a civilian pilot. The pay would be really good, but the biggest complaints my civilian pilot friends have is time away from home. They don't get to choose. People still fly on trips on Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's and Easter. So if they're on the schedule, they have to go fly those days, and they might not get to spend time at home with their own family. On the same token, once you get more senior, you do get those holidays at home, and you're getting paid a really good fight, or a really good amount. Sorry, I was reading the next question here. Have you ever been in a dogfight before? I haven't, because I'm a tanker pilot or refueler pilot. So I haven't been in a dogfight. I have fighters, just a few feet off my wings to my left and to my right, and they're down below me. I've heard them on the radio, taking care of some bad dudes in the past and stuff. But me personally, I don't get in a dogfight, so I'll leave that to them. And then on a physical and mental level, go ahead.
Sorry, can you tell me what a dogfight is? I should probably know, but I don't know what that means.
Yeah, sorry. So somebody asked what a dogfight was, but yeah, what is a dogfight? That's if you have 2 fighter aircraft, here's an American aircraft and here's a Russian aircraft, or I don't pick your favorite bad guy out there, where they'll actually go head to head and be dodging and weaving and ducking and shooting at each other and doing all kinds of stuff. So yeah, that's not the type of plane I flew. So I never did that myself. So I've been in some weird situations and some sneaky situations. Obviously, if I'm a tanker refueling fighters, and fighters have to go someplace and do something sneaky or important, or they've got some grand mission or whatever, they're going to need fuel to go do it. They normally only fly maybe an hour before they need gas, and they would come up to us and we'd refuel them. So if we're doing something weird out there, a tanker's probably doing something sneaky and hush with them or whatever. So yeah, I've done stuff like that, but I mean, it wasn't me in a dogfight, I guess. So I guess the last question somebody had written in ahead of time was on a physical and mental level. How hard was the training? Obviously, you've got to feel at this point for high school. College can be tough depending on your degree. I had a little better time because I had an aviation degree and it was something I really loved, and school came a little bit easier for me, I guess. But pilot training is tough. It's super tough. It's going to be the hardest thing you ever do. So if you think basic training for the military is rough, pilot training wasn't as physically like, oh no, I'm doing push-ups, but mentally it was the most exhausting year ever. And all of us kind of went into it with the mindset that we're trading a year of our life in exchange for the opportunity to be a military pilot, and maybe later on down the line civilian pilot. But it insanely difficult. You're doing super long hours. You're doing things that are brand new to you that both require mental work of planning and visualizing things and using spatial intelligence and thinking about human factors. And hey, I'm going to bank up my airplane and pull really hard. So then there's physical aspects. I need to squeeze my legs, my abdomen super tight to keep blood up in my head so I don't pass out, which is exhausting. But you're thinking about things at the same time you're doing that. You're not just doing all that, but you're navigating to where you're supposed to be navigating to. You're talking to people on the radio to who you're supposed to be talking to. And pilot training is absolutely it's the most fun I would never want to have again in my life. It's just it's a rough year, but by the end of it, when you get wings on your chest, it's amazing to be done with it. So,
all right, kiddos, if you have any questions, definitely either raise your hand and I'll call on you, and you can talk or type them out as we go. And I actually have a couple questions too. Chris, do you know? And I should have asked this ahead of time to give you a chance to look it up, but I know in our side of the military, you know, of course, my husband's not a pilot. We have a lot of friends who were pilot dropouts or washouts. They didn't make it. Do you know what the success rate of military pilot school is?
It kind of depends. So it used to be a lot lower. It kind of depends. So the Air Force kind of decides like, we need this many pilots. And then somewhere along the way, they're like, actually, we need a lot fewer pilots. So wash a bunch of people out. Or sometimes they're like, actually, we need a whole lot of pilots. So we're going to try and keep more people in and try and really help everybody and help them pass and make their way through. Historically, it's been about 70, 75%, because the other thing you have to keep in mind with all this, if you want to be a pilot, and it's really not fair and it's not right and it's not in your control, but medically, you have to be qualified to be a pilot. There are some things that can make it really, really difficult to be a pilot. On the civilian side, you can get away with a lot more. Maybe there's some things that are still kind of deal killers, but maybe you had asthma, maybe you have a bum shoulder, maybe you've got stomach issues or whatever. But in the military, like if you have something, there are a lot of things that can immediately disqualify you, and some of the biggest ones are for your vision. So we all had to go through a week long getting poked and prodded by the military before we ever got a chance to even be told you can have a pilot's light, you can be a pilot, and it was not fun. People got disqualified for eyesight, for even things like sitting height. Like if you're way too tall, the ejection seat, I got a helicopter flying overhead now, the ejection seat in the aircraft might not operate properly, so you can't be a pilot for the military. Like there are just these really weird things. So getting back to your question though, between medical and everything else, historically, if you got to pilot training, there was about a 70% pass rate. Now it's probably more towards like an 85-ish, but I can count guys all along the way with me who, one fell off here, two fell off there. And the guys who didn't make it, it's not like the Air Force said, if you're out or you're gone, the Air Force, Marines, or Navy or anybody like that, they wouldn't say that. They just retrain you into a different job. So they're not saying you're a bad officer. When I taught pilot training, it really stunk, but I had to tell guys, I'm sorry, but the Air Force has decided being an Air Force pilot isn't right for you, but we got them great jobs. Maybe they got to go be an intel officer. Maybe they got to go work with missiles or satellites. Maybe they got to go, there's all kinds of awesome things out there that you can do in the military that aren't you being in a cockpit. And as a matter of fact, only 1% of the Air Force, I don't know the statistics for the other services, are actually pilots. I mean, it's a pretty small number. And again, it just goes back to it takes a lot of effort to get to that end result. So.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, that's as we're in the satellite side of things, and I have a lot of people be like, well, I made it, X far in my pilot school training. Yeah. So I want to see any other questions come in. Anything, if you want to use your mic, you're welcome to do that. Any other questions? I know Chris answered a lot of the questions that I had going in. So I really, really appreciate Chris taking the time out of your day to come and speak. And kids, if you're watching this as a recording, if you have questions, don't hesitate to email them to me or email them to your homeroom teacher and ask them to get them to me, and I'll get them on to Chris and back. So we can definitely get questions, if you might come up with them later, answered as well. So it does look like we've got all the questions covered. A few people have commented that you answered their questions.
Okay.
So again, a huge thank you to Chris. I think you did a wonderful job. Thanks to those kids who came. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your Thursday afternoon.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you.
Okay, bye. A couple of people say thank you and thank you for your service, Chris. So
Thanks, guys.
All right,
I'll see
bye,
you.
guys.